Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public with us this evening, and those that may be joining us via the webcast. I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this meeting of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee here at Maidstone Town Hall this evening, Tuesday the 10th of March 2020. Usual housekeeping, not anticipating any fire drills this evening, so should you hear such a thing, please consider it to be real and meaningful and follow the instructions of the Democratic Service Officer sat to my right, who will ensure that we find an expedient way to leave the building. I'd also like to ask if anybody's planning on recording or filming this evening. And I'm asking you not to prevent you, but just so that others in the room would be aware. And I do see an indication over to my left that that might be the case. The meeting is webcast anyway, but others may have exercised their right to record. Finally, the usual courtesies, please, with mobile devices, so they don't beep or ring, would be appreciated. And we can continue straight to business. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I think I've received apologies from Councillor de Wigandon. Other than that, a full house? Yes. Which will move us nicely into item 2, the notification of substitute members.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Perry for Councillor de Wigandon Shepherd.
Thank you. Item 3, urgent items. There are no urgent items, but I would just draw to your attention that I requested page 108 from the agenda pack be provided for you with colour printing, because it is very difficult to differentiate the shades otherwise. It's not an urgent update, but you have been provided with that for clarity. And agenda item 4, if I may take a note of visiting members, and if I can trouble you to come to the microphone and announce yourself for the record, and if there are any items that you would wish to speak to, please indicate.
Jonathan Pearl for items 16 and 18, if I may.
16 and 18 is noted.
Councillor Valspring, I'd just like to reserve my right, if I may. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Springett, reserving rights. You're going to say you can't do that, so I'm going to encourage Councillor Mrs Springett to say I want to speak to all items, and then you'll probably say no when it comes to it. Is that
yes,
the
that's
case?
correct.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? No indication, no note taken. Disclosures of lobbying. Councillor Garton.
I believe we've all been lobbied on item 17 with a letter from Calc.
Can I note that for all of us that we've received lobbying in that respect? Yeah, that's noted. I think, at least indirectly, I've been lobbied on the Lenham neighbourhood plan as well, so I'll record that for myself. Anybody else? Yeah. So, just to take the record, could you just raise your hands if you have been lobbied?
Lenham neighbourhood plan.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes. I think we have a note of that. Thank you, members. Any other declarations, please? No. Oh, Councillor Garton again.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't remember being lobbied on Lenham neighbourhood plan, but I wouldn't rule it out completely.
Okay, noted. Agenda item 7, if we consider for a moment whether any items should be taken in private, we've got no yellow pages in front of us this evening, so everything will be in open session. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. And moving next to the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on the 7th of January. They have been circulated with the papers. I trust you've all had a chance to peruse. May I take them as a correct copy and sign them? Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 9, presentation of petitions. I'm advised there are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 10, this is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions. I believe there are 5-6 questions registered with us this evening. Our constitution restricts this session to 30 minutes. Group leaders have the right to respond after I have responded, but I'm actually going to ask whether, for a matter of expediency, that right will be waived. Councillor Cox indicated to me earlier that it would. Councillor Perry?
I'm happy to waive as well. Thank you.
Okay. It's not to suppress the debate, but I would like to use the 30 minutes that everybody's asked the question can get their question. So we'll start with the questions. Questions from members of the public. And the first questioner is Mr. Peter Titchener. I should just tell everybody that when it's your turn to ask the question, come to the speaker's table as Mr. Titchener has and press the button and the red light will show and then you can speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Right, my question to the Chairman is, what are the main criteria by which sustainability is judged? For example, does the absence of shops, doctors and regular public transport make significant planned housing in small villages unsustainable?
Thank you. The criteria is set out in our local plan review sustainability appraisal scoping report. So we will look at all of the factors that you've mentioned and many others. And that will be looked at in the context of emerging policies as part of the local plan review. The process is undertaken, finally the sustainability appraisal is undertaken independently of the planning department as a further measure of independence. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Chairman. Yes, I thank you for your reply. Can I ask whether the same conditions on sustainability will apply to the G&T community as much as to the settled community when it's sorted out or when you make a decision?
I think an identical set of considerations are taken into account when we look at all of the sites, whether they be employment sites, gypsy and traveller sites, housing sites, but all factors relating to sustainability are considered and varying degrees of weight are given to them.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Mr. Peter Cooling. If I might vary the order, and I tell you why. I have another question. The questioner regrettably isn't present this evening, and they've asked that I read it on their behalf. So with everybody's forbearance, I'm going to read that question, then allow you to ask yours, because they marry together quite well. And we can answer them hopefully in the whole. So the question I've received from Ms. Anna Wright is that October 2022 has been noted as the deadline for the final plan submission for the local development scheme. Will there be a first round of initial sifting of those sites, definitely likely or definitely unlikely to be considered, so that some of the applicants will receive information sooner than October 2022? And I think you'll see there's some synergy with your question if you would like to take over from here, Mr. Cooling.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We understand that sites submitted as a result of the call for sites have been classified into green, amber and red, with red initially thought very unlikely to be selected. Apparently, the results of detailed appraisal for all sites will be released simultaneously, that is, red sites at the same time as green and amber. Why, therefore, cannot the detailed analysis for the red sites be done first, so that if they fail to meet necessary selection criteria, they can be declared as such, with clear evidence having been accumulated to support such declaration and to defend at any appeal?
It's quite difficult to answer this question without relating it to specific examples, but if, for example, there were a site that was in an area with a significant level of landscape protection, which would on a green, amber, red scale immediately require its removal. But in actual fact, such a site were to be very well supported and have significant merits. By dismissing it at this stage, we would lose the opportunity to include it later. So it's not as simple as red, amber, green, in, out. No decisions have been made at this stage that are final in any way. So we need to keep all the cards on the table. If you have a supplementary.
Yes, I do indeed. And it's not at all surprising that there are a few specific examples which can be held out to try and prove a generality. But as the call for sites has given rise to somewhat in excess, we believe, of 60,000 possible dwellings, way in excess of need, it strikes us as a considerable convenience to officers just to leave everything on the table, rather than at least look at the red sites, which are clearly against all criteria, and in fact may not have the paperwork to support them, and in fact may have been turned down at previous planning applications. So why cannot the officers be instructed to do their best on behalf of residents by starting with a red and knocking out those which clearly fail any reasonable criteria?
It's absolutely not the case that this is for a convenience of officers. We rely upon our officers to give us the best professional advice that is available. It is 100% for members to make the final decisions. And I think, as I've illustrated in my first answer to you, we want all of the information in front of us so that we can make the best decisions for the borough in the whole. So I don't think it would be expedient to give them specific instructions to wheedle anything in particular out. I think what we must all do is to gather our energy and our efforts to advance the process as quickly as possible and as expediently as possible and get to the conclusions and take out the ifs, the whats and the maybes in the round as soon as possible. Thank you for your question. Mr. Healy, I believe you have a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Question 11 of your scoping themes and issues public consultation last year asked residents for their views on preferred options for future patterns of housing growth. Based on the summary of responses, a focus on Maidstone town centre and or a dispersal approach across the borough were most favoured. Garden communities was the least favoured option, and in light of this, why is this council pursuing its own council-led garden community at the expense of focusing greater efforts and resource on regenerating and densifying Maidstone town centre as requested by residents in your consultation?
So I think the first part of my response to you needs to make it extremely clear that the role of this committee is the consideration of the local plan review in its entirety. And as such, we are completely distinct from any other arm of the council that may or may not be promoting an area in the capacity of landowner or assisting landowners. So that there is an absolute distinction between the role of this committee and that process that you perhaps referring to. So I can't answer for that other side. But then what I would draw out very strongly is that we've not reached the decision-making stage at the moment, and we do see in the report before us this evening where residents have expressed preferences for where development may or may not be. And I'd also point to the work that this committee has been doing to facilitate the delivery of housing, for example, in the town centre, by actually bringing together development documents to actually assist that process to develop sustainable sites, preferentially in line with our current local plan. So, you know, I think as far as the role of this committee is going, we're being extremely open, extremely transparent, and we are actually doing everything we can. If you have a supplementary question.
I was going to have a supplementary question, but actually I think the next question leads quite nicely into it, so I'm going to leave it there and let the next one
Okay,
come up.
thank you for your question. Miss Russell, I believe you're next at number 4.
Thank you, Chairman. During our campaign, we have sought advice from the government and the then Housing Minister, Esther McVey, along with Andrea Hall from Development Plans, who responded saying, and I quote, "I understand Maidstone Borough Council are carrying out a local plan review scoping themes and issues consultation. I would encourage you to engage with this process to ensure local views are heard." The officers state in their report that MBC received a substantial response to this Regulation 18 public consultation and that many of them were from Marden residents. People took time and care to respond to this consultation personally, responding in many different ways, but with the overarching theme that they did not want option C garden communities. Given this substantial response and the now elongated timescale for the local plan review, I would like to ask this committee how you will ensure that these views of local people will continue to be taken into account in this review process, and how will they inform your options for the spatial strategy for Maidstone Borough?
And therein lies the difficulty. It's a difficult task to balance all of these things together between the legislative framework that we have to work in, the desires of the public, the art of the possible. It's not the science of the certain. I think everybody sat around this table will be most mindful of all of the public consultations and comments, and we will do our very, very best to balance that with the evidence that is provided and with opportunities as they arise. Do you have a supplementary question?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Greenan?
Could you tell me what steps Maidstone Borough Council have taken over the past year and intend to take over the next year to increase the proportion of affordable housing in the borough to meet the needs of local residents?
This is something that there's been a lot of debate about in this chamber amongst members and a lot of genuine heartfelt concern around this issue. We've recently completed a public consultation of our draft Affordable and Local Needs Housing Supplementary Planning document. I think I got all those words in the right order just about. The document seeks to improve delivery of truly affordable homes, rather than homes that are just technically classified as affordable, but still come forward at prices that are out of the reach of many residents. It also seeks to provide clarity on the council's requirements for affordable housing in order to smooth negotiations with developers and registered providers and to help bring affordable housing forwards. In addition to that, in the autumn of last year, one of our sister committees, the Community Housing and Environment Committee, took the decision that Maidstone Borough Council should once again start to develop its own portfolio of affordable housing. The decision is reflected in our newly adopted capital programme, whereby 30 million will be invested to develop up to 200 affordable homes over a 5-year period. And the decision is that the council will only invest in homes at affordable rent. That might be a drop in the ocean to the overall requirement, but I think genuinely I could reassure you that members of this council are deeply concerned to see actually affordable housing made precisely what it says on the packet, affordable. Do you have a supplementary?
I did, you sort of covered it a little bit in there. With a large number of families like my own earning local wages and living in private rentals, faced with increasing rental costs, do the council believe that making 85 affordable homes available in Q3 really address the local need?
I don't think any of us would sit here and say that, you know, a single quarter of a single quantum like that addresses the need. What I can tell you is that from the last plan-making process, part of the research that we did, the objectively assessed need for housing, went into considerable detail and in broad terms said that 30% of the housing requirement needs to be in that affordable category. And in acknowledging that in this particular quarter we've delivered that, that's just 1 quarter of the 4 quarters of this year of 20 years of plan making in the current plan period. So it's part of it, but if you do the numbers backwards, if we did that every quarter, we would be on track to deliver what we were able to calculate as the true need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more, Mr. Adkin.
Good evening. Chairman, could you tell us how the call for sites assessment will remain politically objective?
That's a very big question. Open it. So I think I've got to give you very much a personal view on this. And that's one that delivery of implementing the outcome of the call for sites, it isn't politically driven. And actually, for it to remain objective, everybody on this council needs to work together. Sometimes political colours get in the way of that, but actually I think that the people that you have elected to serve this borough, for the most part, are concerned about doing the right thing for the borough and not for political objectives. And I think we're united on that. If you have a supplementary question, you're welcome to ask it.
Yeah, if I could. So you said this committee is sort of independent of the process. A member of this committee has recently been in communication with a number of our neighbours saying Lenham is an obvious target for development and refers to the fact that that's due partly because of the independent nature of our ward councillors, and that no other political party sees much to lose in our ward. So I wonder, in light of those comments that have been made to our neighbours in public documents, how do you feel about the independence of this group?
I can't speak for any individual. I've given you my personal view on how we should all work together. And I'm reminded that the power is in your hands as the electorate as to who you put in here. We're just as good as the last ballot box, but the intent is genuine. Thank you. Councillor English.
I know that you said that we would waive the right, but given the time and given the nature of the last question, if we could just say something very briefly from this side. And I do mean
So long as you don't take us into political territory.
No, quite the reverse. Planning, whether it's development control or planning policy, is very much a process that has to be gone through and meeting legislative and regulatory hoops. If at any stage it becomes partisan, in any way whatsoever, it would risk the council's local plan and the local plan making review collapsing. So whatever our personal views, our personal political parties, well, I think we all know, those of us who've been on the council for some time and have been involved in planning, and new members too, that we have to keep this process focused on objective evidence. Otherwise, there will be no process and it will all collapse in recriminations. And therefore, even if we thought there was some advantage there in the short term, it would be no real advantage at all.
Given that Councillor English has made that response, would any other group representatives like to add anything? Councillor Perry?
I totally endorse what Councillor English has said, and he and I have worked together on the planning committee for a number of years, and I certainly respect his views and I totally support them. Thank you.
No other indication, so we'll move on. Agenda item 12, it's the matter of the committee work programme. You'll find it on page 7 of your papers. It's just for noting. Mr. Egerton, do you want to make some comment to it?
This is just a very brief matter, Chairman, just for consistency's sake. We do have the local development scheme as item 18 on this agenda. I just wanted to clarify that the work programme will reflect that. So there is a date in September for the local plan review 18B preferred approaches public consultation, and that will, if the local development scheme is agreed tonight and moves on to full council, the intention will be for that to be at the beginning of October rather than the beginning of September.
Thank you for that clarity, and as you say, subject to what this committee may or may not decide later. Councillor English.
You will recall, Mr. Chairman, that some years ago, and it is some years ago, there was a large petition put forward about a 20-mile-an-hour scheme in Hale Road. At that time, it was impossible to progress it because of the then policy of Kent County Council. You will be aware that the policy position and protocols of Kent County Council have now moved somewhat, and a number of schemes are currently being consulted on in Bridgeport and elsewhere. I would like, not immediately because it will take some time, I would like early in the new municipal year, so there's plenty reasonable preparation, a full report on the feasibility of moving forward with that scheme brought back to this committee, because the background at KCC has substantially changed.
I think we note what you're saying. It relies upon KCC making their findings formal and public. Well, one might imagine that they might be presented as through the Joint Transportation Board first. As chairman of that board this year, I can tell you that they haven't offered that in the current for the current agenda setting, but we will keep an eye on. As soon as we can get it reported, we will get it reported, Councillor English.
All I would say is I really do want this on an agenda in June or July, because county members for Bridgeport have been able to take this forward through the new process, and I don't see why we can't.
Well, I'm not aware of that. As chairman of the Joint Transportation Board, that has not been reported. You know, what individual members are or are not pushing for, I don't know. But as soon as we can get it on this agenda, we will. Other than that, is the work programme noted? Thank you. Agenda item 13, outside bodies, the 3 reports in the agenda packs. I simply need to ask you if they're noted. Are they noted? Councillor English, are you indicating to speak on that item?
No, it's just, I just won't, I assume not, but if members did have any questions, or we did move it through it a bit quick.
For the sake of the record, are there any questions relating to those reports? No. Thank you. I had that one right then, thank you. Item 14, Ms Dunay will help us with the third quarter budget and performance monitoring report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So this report was due to come to the cancelled meeting of February. It looks at the 9-month period up to the 31st of December 2019. So the content is historical in nature, and there are some areas in which the world has moved on since the report was written. Given that, and given that I think you have a busy agenda ahead of you, I'm happy to just take any questions that members might have on the detail of the report.
A wonderfully succinct introduction, thank you. Members, I see one indication there from Councillor Garton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 23, salary slippage, and a comment on page 25. This is a credit budget which allows for service underspends on salaries due to temporary vacancies arising from staff turnover. This is currently an adverse variance which is expected to be offset by service underspends by the year end. Now, I read this as you may be expecting vacancies.
So what we do every year as part of the budget setting process is to look at our salary forecast. We know, because it always happens, that there will be slippage in that because of where we're holding vacancies during the year. So we tend not to forecast that we'll spend all of that salary budget. Otherwise, that would mean we would have to find savings elsewhere when we know that there's going to be slippage further down the line. So that's basically, we build that forecast into each committee based on what we know at the start of the year. And it's something that we monitor during the year, and it's come up with this variance at this point in time. Does that make sense?
It sort of makes sense. It just worries me a bit because we are under enormous pressure, not only financial pressures, but also with the local plan review forthcoming, etc. I would not like to see any vacancies, and I hope that officers of all departments make sure that we are fully staffed throughout the year to tackle all the tasks we've got ahead of us.
If I could just add to that, so it's reported to us as an adverse outcome. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
In terms of the budget, it's a bad thing because we've spent more than what we forecast. In terms of our operations, it's a good thing because it means we've been able to fill more vacancies than we were forecast.
I must admit this is a category on the budget that has perhaps not leapt out at me in the past, and for 2 years in a row, or whatever it is, 3 years maybe, we've actually had an underspend as a council as a whole, and we treat it as an underspend, but we don't have a budget line for underspend as a whole. It just seems a little bit of an odd way of doing business, so perhaps we'll be mindful of it in the next round of budget setting. Are there any other comments relating to the report in front of us? Councillor Perry?
Yes, it's back to the same theme, really. We've got an income shortfall of 332,000, which is pretty significant, it seems to me. And overall, we have this 0.111 million. And it does seem to me it's all based on forward projections. So I'd like a little bit more information on what these forward projections really are, because I'm a little bit concerned about that. We heard the issue about the vacancies where, okay, you've got a saving on your expenditure, but actually that's not such a good picture because we actually need the staff resources. So if you actually had the staff resources, the picture would be even worse than you're presenting here tonight. So I'm a little bit concerned about where we're going with this. Perhaps you could explain a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the situation with regard to the income shortfall is an issue. We're forecasting that will continue to be an issue and it will get slightly worse as we reach the end of the year. Moving into next year, Mr. Jarman has developed a plan for addressing that so we don't find ourselves in a similar situation for the next financial year. In terms of the overall underspend for the council, there was a small underspend forecast at the end of December. We currently are expecting, because of what's happening outside of this committee, that we're on track to broadly break even or possibly have a small underspend at the end of this financial year. Coming back to the issue around the salaries, it's really a technical adjustment based on needing to budget in a certain way because we know what our staffing structure is, knowing that not all posts are filled at the point at which we're setting the budget, so factoring that in rather than effectively falsely increasing our need to find savings at that point in time, and then knowing that we'll find ourselves in a kind of a large underspend position at the end of the year. So the aim of it is to kind of more effective management of our finances. I accept it does look a little bit confusing and it might look a little bit new to this committee because it used to be something that would just sit with Policy and Resources Committee because it's kind of a technical adjustment. We changed that a couple of years ago, so it does now show against each committee, and where we're forecasting that slippage, if it relates to that committee, it will be reported to that committee.
It was perhaps a little bit unfair asking you the question that I did, but what it translates to is that if the head of service succeeds in having a full team throughout the year and delivering a good service, that he actually fails to deliver the budget that he's held to. Councillor English.
Yeah, I think we have to recognise facts that although it's not really been carried over this year, because I think to an extent we did rectify that to next year's budget. But the fact of the matter is that we, as a committee, did point out to certain officers that the budget projections for income, particularly in planning, were wildly optimistic. And therefore, the shortfall is something this committee has actually forecast, and it's not in any sense a surprise that we didn't get the income, which frankly was unrealistic to expect. So I have to say that it does not come as a surprise to me. But of course, if you've got a full staffing team and you're predicting certain levels of income coming in from major planning applications, and because of the state of the economy, those major planning applications doesn't come in, you do end up in that situation. What it does flag up to me is we have to be very careful going forward that with some of our redevelopment proposals, that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot in relation to what has historically saved this council over the years in terms of parking income. And that we actually have to look going forward next year, when we look at the new technology in parking, to actually see how, in terms of revenue, we can mesh with the climate change agenda to actually try and achieve a mutually beneficial outcome, both in terms of climate change and in terms of finance maximisation.
That's always one of my pet hates with this budget as it's presented, that we muddle up income.
I do understand that.
Costs
yeah.
of, we save the day by doing well with parking, and it hides the underlying, perhaps, underfunding of the core service. And I think, well, we've spoken about this enough at this committee. We did highlight our concerns to policy and resources, and I think when we were at full council a week or so back, we actually underlined the concerns again. And I just urge us to all be that much more robust when we go into the next round of budget making. Yeah. Members, is there anything else you want to raise here? I mean, I think the 3 performance KPIs have all come in appropriately, so that's good to note. But there's much more to do. On the enforcement part of that, I get a little bit lost, but we did actually ask for the contextual background of the total number of outstanding enforcement cases. And I don't know if that's got lost in the request again. Do you happen to know that to give us context?
It's not something I have the background on to hand, but I'm happy to take that back and maybe respond to the committee by email.
Would you do that, please? Because I think we're looking at enforcement and how quickly we respond to fresh cases, but that's nothing to do with how quickly we clear them up and deal with them. Councillor English.
That information does exist because it's been fairly regularly reported to planning committees, so it should be easy enough to supply it to this committee as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely data that's there. But again, when we review the KPIs for this committee next time, perhaps we actually state that we want that, because then we get it, but despite the fact we've asked for it contextually. Any more for any more? So we're asked to note the report, members. Is it noted?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, given that you've sort of made a recommendation there about the receiving that KPI information, shouldn't we amend the report so it's not just for noting, but it has that particular recommendation as well?
Personally, I was content to just take the officer's advice that we will be emailed with that. If you're minded to formalise it, it will be in the minutes.
It's just that as you asked for the information before and we haven't, for whatever reason, had it, I thought it might be a good idea to put it on record. We're close approaching the time when we review the KPIs, so that's the time to bed that in. Yeah, well, but we'll ask that is underlined in the minutes. So we've noted the report. We can close that item. That brings us to agenda item 15. This relates to the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan, Regulation 16. Mr. Edgerton, I think you're going to take us through this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Following independent examination, Maidstone's adopted local plan contains policies for Lenham, which make provision for a neighbourhood plan to be produced, and for this to contain housing site allocations and associated infrastructure for 1,000 homes. There's been significant work with Maidstone Borough Council planning officers, and the Parish Council undertook the first statutory public consultation of the draft neighbourhood plan between the 24th of September and 9th of November 2018, where Maidstone Borough Council made representations. Following further advice and support from Maidstone Borough Council planning officers, further evidence production and neighbourhood plan revisions, the Parish Council is undertaking a second stage consultation. This consultation commenced on the 14th of February and finishes on the 27th of March. Maidstone Borough Council is required to facilitate this consultation and also has the opportunity to provide representations. The documents and representations are sent to an independent examiner who will then test the neighbourhood plan against basic conditions that are set out by the government, and these are provided in paragraph 1.7 of the report. Officers recommend that a representation is made on the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan because although there is general support for the plan, there are concerns around the robustness of evidence base and lack of strategy to deliver the homes and infrastructure. There are also a number of additional points, specific points, that require addressing to achieve conformity with national and local policies and greater clarity and consistency throughout the plan. Further details are provided in the covering report and are set out in detail in Appendix 1, which is the proposed representation. The report recommends that Lenham Neighbourhood Plan be generally supported, subject to the resolution of matters raised in the Council's representation at Appendix 1, and that the Council's representation on the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan attached as Appendix 1 be approved. Thank you.
I believe that we have Mr. Mackenzie from Lenham Parish Council that would like to speak on this item before I open it to debate with the committee.
Where are we? Chairman, councillors, good evening. My name is Sandy Mackenzie and I'm chair of the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan Group. The Lenham Neighbourhood Plan has been a long time in the making, but following the inspector's examination and recommendations on the Maidstone local plan in 2017, we have moved forward with publication and consultation on our pre-Regulation 14 draft, the Regulation 14 draft itself, and now the Regulation 16 draft Neighbourhood Plan. During the process, we have consulted regularly and taken advice from your officers to ensure they had visibility on the evolution of our key documents and to permit their ongoing input. Following publication of the agenda and papers for this meeting on 2nd of March, we are now aware of the Council's draft representation on the Regulation 16 plan. We are grateful for the detailed level of scrutiny that is evident within it and the statement that there is general support for the plan, subject to resolution of matters identified in the representation. We have studied these matters and we conclude that many of the points are well made and we anticipate being able to adjust the plan accordingly and quickly. The main reason for my being here tonight is in relation to the concern expressed in the representation as to the robustness of the evidence base and strategy to deliver the infrastructure relating to 1,000 houses, in particular as it relates to the southern road route that links and crosses several areas of land ownership. The Lenham Infrastructure Delivery Group is formed of members of the Neighbourhood Plan team and representatives of each of the landowners and developers. It has been an essential part of the development of the Lenham Plan and has met regularly over the last 3 years. A clear consensus has developed on the benefits to all of delivering the southern route. We accept, however, that this may not be documented in a way that best demonstrates that the route is clearly deliverable. The Council's representation suggests that a memorandum of understanding or similar is required to document the agreement of all relevant parties to delivering the route. While we accept the need for this greater robustness, we also appreciate that achieving this, given the short notice, will likely take us beyond the end of the consultation period, and perhaps beyond the point to which the representations would normally have been collated and forwarded to the examiner. Given this, we request that the committee consider instructing the council officers, firstly, to assist Lenham Parish Council in the development of documentation in the form required to satisfy the council, and secondly, to work with Lenham Parish Council and the examiner to ensure that this further documentation is shared with the examiner when available so it can be fully considered during the examination process. I would mention that we are already in discussion with the examiner's office on this point, having taken advice from Sue Whiteside. I thank you for listening and hopefully being able to assist in this matter.
Before coming to you, Councillor English, just picking up the 2 points that the Speaker has made there, I think it would go without saying that our officers would certainly assist with the preparation of whatever documentation is necessary with advice and input. Would you be able to just confirm that, Mr. Richardson?
I can confirm that officers would be more than happy to continue to assist Lenham Parish Council and their representatives with the production of the neighbourhood plan. Thank you.
And then I think beyond that, the timing of matters is now at the discretion of the examiner, and it's good to hear that you're already in communication with. So that just deals with those two direct issues. And now to Councillor English.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm relieved to hear those last 2 points because having sat in quite a number of pre-application meetings, and Councillor Perry has been in some of them too, we've seen from the development control side just how much hard work has gone into this process from Lenham Parish Council, from their consultants, and indeed from the landowners in Lenham who have engaged with this process. So it's almost a model, and it would be a shame if, for whatever reason, it just slightly ran out of track. So it's good to see that these should be resolved. I looked at the Borough Council's representations, and generally, I think I agree with most of them. The only thing I was a little confused on is still looking at objection 1.17 on page 39 as to, I'm not quite sure what the parish council is actually, because it seems that there's a contradiction in the parish council. Are we saying that the parish council has essentially contradicted its own position on this? Right, so that's what it means, because it didn't read very clearly. I have to say that if that hadn't been the case, I would not necessarily want us to object to this, because one of the problems we have with local plans and neighbourhood plans and elsewhere is that we plan housing, we plan economic development, we don't plan a lot of open space, countryside and biodiversity into them. So I would have to say that I wouldn't, all other things being equal, not particularly want to object to this unless we actually have to, Mr. Edgerton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can confirm that actually the site itself was initially not provided, I think, by the previous version of the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan. In fact, I think it was taken out and has subsequently been put in, but the evidence suggests that it shouldn't be. It doesn't meet the criteria that for local green space designation, and so you know, there isn't, unfortunately, the justification to take this particular site forward. The criteria is not one which is set by the authority. It's actually contained within the National Planning Policy Framework itself, and we are of the view that it doesn't meet that criteria, so it is a point-blank, I'm afraid, objection.
And from what you're saying, there is no way it could meet the criteria, is that what you're saying? However redrafted?
I think that's the correct answer, yes.
And at the end of the day, the independent examiner can just sanity check that and confirm or otherwise. So, Councillor Garton.
Some speakers said tonight it's been a long time in the making, the neighbourhood plan in Lenham. I remember going to a public viewing in Tythe Barn way back in 2015. So it has been a very, very long way, and I think we should tonight support as well as we can the community of Lenham. There are 48 matters being raised. The parish council representative responded quite gratefully that a lot of these matters raised are valid concerns, and I think Maidstone as a borough should do its utmost to support the community of Lenham on this one. I know political for a different reason, for proposed garden villages, etc. Moods are running very, very hot in Lenham occasionally. I think we should certainly on this issue make very sure that Lenham has our support, and we are working with Lenham, not against Lenham. As you said quite rightly, Mr. Chairman, tonight, we are not tonight the decision maker. It is already with the inspector. So we have a duty of care to go for option B, to make our concerns known. But at the same time, we should do our utmost to support Lenham to make sure that this plan, after how many years ever, will succeed in the end of the day. And that is just a message I would like to, for us to all to support, and for the officers and the community of Lenham to take away from tonight's meeting.
Mr. Edgerton.
I think I'm grateful to Councillor Garton. I'd just like to provide some clarity. I think Councillor Garton's got this absolutely right. the recommendation is very specific. We are at the stage where, as a committee, we're asking you to agree the representation or make changes to that representation as part of an external process with an independent examiner. But I think I can also provide some reassurance to Lenham Parish Council and the people of Lenham as well, in that we will be continuing to work closely, very, very closely with Lenham Parish Council and the representatives. We have, even just since the previous consultation, had over 120 emails from the representative, which we've been responded to in a timely fashion. There is the ongoing issue of the amount of extra evidence that will be required, I think, to have an examination. And I can assure everyone that we will be working with the representatives of Lenham Parish Council and the Parish Council itself to make sure that the adequate evidence, if at all possible, is submitted to the independent examiner, and that we will consider some detailed discussions with the Parish Council around about the timing of that as well. But that will be a separate matter which will continue between officers and the Parish Council itself.
Members are minded to move from the chair then the recommendations as per the papers on page 33, seconded by Councillor English, that the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan be generally supported, subject to the resolution of matters raised in the Council Representation Appendix 1, and that the Council's representation on the Lenham Neighbourhood Plan attached to Appendix 1 be approved. Those in favour, please. I believe that's unanimous, therefore carried. Thank you, members. We can head to agenda item 16 next. This is the feedback from the Scoping Themes and Issues Regulation 18 consultation that was referred to earlier this evening. And again, Mr. Edgerton, perhaps you could help us with this.
Thank you, Chairman. Local plans and their reviews are significant programmes of work with many technical and procedural requirements set out by the government. Okay. Maidstone adopted its local plan in October 2017 and is now partway through a review of that plan. As part of the process, an early stage public consultation was undertaken on the scoping, themes and issues to be considered for the review, and that took place for a 10-week period between July 2019 and the end of September 2019. The scope of potential topics was addressed, and a number of overarching and technical questions were included. The consultation attracted over 550 responses, including 3 petitions. A detailed technical summary of the responses is provided in the report, and a question-by-question analysis is provided in Appendix 1. I therefore will only pull out a few key highlights. There is broad concern about the level of proposed housing growth. There is recognition that placing all growth in one location will not be sufficient to meet needs, and that a combination of approaches will be required. One of the most popular responses was for a combination of growth taking place in Maidstone and also being dispersed elsewhere in the borough. There is a desire to use brownfield land and a recognition that housing should be brought forward with relevant infrastructure and facilities, including community facilities. In terms of infrastructure, the greatest concern was for transport infrastructure and the need for it to be upgraded. The desire for public transport improvements, investment and delivery also featured prominently in many responses. The results of the public consultation feeds into the ongoing work on the local plan review. However, at this stage, members are reminded that this report is for noting. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got an indication from Councillor Clark, if you would like to.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on a point in your discussion there. On page 64, you mentioned about the sort of the indications of how residents would prefer to move forward. But actually, in that sample of data, we're really talking, we've got an A, B and a C, but we're talking about a total of 45 residents in that data. Clearly, the Maidstone focus, as you say, was the most favourable with residents, but the sample seems so small that I'd almost question if that was valid as evidence.
Thank you very much indeed. It's an interesting point. Of course, what we can't do is compel all representatives to make responses on all questions. And so we have selected here some of the main areas which would be of interest to the committee, some of the key decisions the committee is going to be making in future. And so I think we can gauge a lot from the nature of the questions, but also the level of responses that were received as well. Thank you.
I always do this to you, don't I, Councillor Pearl? Sorry, as visiting member, you should have gone first. If you would like to make your comments now, you please come to the table.
Thank you, Chairman. It is just a short one, and it's more of a question to the officers. Borough councillors were sort of formally invited to respond to this consultation. You know, we were all given a pack with a covering letter and so on and so forth. The summary on pages 62 to 64 imply that very few of us did. Now, I did. I felt sort of duty-bound to experience the turgid nature of the inaccessibility of the consultation that I think members of the public were experiencing. But I'd be interested in knowing how many actual borough councillors did respond.
Do you have such information at your fingertips?
Thank you very much, Chairman. What I do have, and all members have at their fingertips, is Appendix 1. And what that does, it breaks it down into the question by question. It also states whom it was who responded to those questions. And so the answer is actually provided in the papers as Appendix 1 on a question-by-question basis. That starts at page 66 of the sheets.
It's an interesting one, that, so councillors responding to the consultation. So I think I'm correct in saying, and a nod will be sufficient, that if a councillor responds to a consultation in this manner, it carries no more weight than a member of the public individually. So we don't have any special influence in this. So just to make that clear to everybody. And I must admit, I personally tended not to, because ultimately we're going to be the decision makers, and that's our moment of response. So we're entitled as individual members of the public to respond, and the fact that we happen to be councillors adds no additional weight. Councillor English.
Very much. I did not respond on this particular one because I thought that was almost double jeopardy, because I'd be sort of looking at my own consultation response, which although like many other members, I have responded to other similar consultations, like Councillor Pearl, I think, for example, the town centre opportunity sites, where I made considerable representations on those. But what I would say on this is what comes out of this entire scoping report, actually, is the absence of much talk about biodiversity and green space. There's a lot here about housing, there's a lot here about infrastructure and employment. There isn't very much about what is supposed to be the other leg of the MPPF stool. There's a bit, and hopefully our local plan and our local plan review will have some considerable detail on that, not least because of the climate change agenda, which is about the only place where these matters are picked up. But I have to say, I think it's a little disappointing that area is so underplayed in this report, and there isn't much we can do about it now. But I do think that is a bit of a problem, really, and I have to say that has consistently been an issue that I have been disappointed with in one way and another with this council over the last 20 years, to be honest, that we do not address the non-built infrastructure, if you want to put it like that way, and it is essential to public health and to the environment that we actually do address these things going forward.
Are you saying that you're disappointed that the question wasn't there, or that people didn't respond to the question?
I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both, really.
Because it was, after all, this committee that in relatively recent terms were content with the question formats, and perhaps that's when we should have made more of that. Councillor Clark.
And I did raise it at the time and was not taken up on it.
Councillor Clark. Yeah, we're ready to move on.
Okay, so I just wanted to also, something else that Councillor English mentioned about the green space, but something else that that sort of came out to me when looking at the data was that, again, going back to this Maidstone focus, we don't typically have parishes in the centre of Maidstone. So again, with this weighting, and I, from a sort of scientific perspective, I'm sort of alarm bells are going a little bit with the way it's presented, because parish councils will give their feedback for their own parishes, but there won't necessarily be the same organisation within the town centre, let's say, or the built-up area of Maidstone, because many parts of Maidstone aren't represented with a parish council. So I'm not saying that we dismiss any of this, because it is data, but I do think that we've got to be very careful about when we draw our analysis from these figures, because there is scope for what I would call noise on the signal if it was a scientific paper.
I think that earlier comment still applies. A parish council is a single response, as a residence is a single response, as a councillor of this council is a single response. But at the end of the day, the weight of balance is part of the burden on this committee as to how much influence we attribute to any consultation or indeed any other piece of evidence that eventually comes to us. Councillor Garton.
What I find in this listing of responses is that, yeah, we've got parish councils, councillors responding, and it never tells us which parish council or which group, but I find a lot of Marden being mentioned. Now, if we mention one local group, I think we should make a local sort of a diagram of where did we get which responses from which part of the borough. And that I don't want to, Marden being vilified for putting their responses in here and being highlighted here as the only community. On the other hand, if we have an overall map of where do these responses come from, we could possibly rule out a little bit this chicken for voting for Christmas idea, that certain people obviously see things different because of local pressures or plans in their area, and so that there's obviously an enhanced bit of lobbying going on for some communities. But I find it a bit, I'm not comfortable with the community of Marden being highlighted so often in this document.
I'm not really getting where you're coming from there, Councillor Garton. In fact of the matter is there were a significant number of responses from a particular geographical area.
I think if, Mr. Chairman...
Councillor Garton, I haven't finished speaking yet.
Sorry.
What weight we, as the final decision makers, will attribute to that is yet to be determined, but it's just a matter of fact that on this occasion that's where the responses came from.
If
I wish to respond.
If I may. I think it is just, if we would have in this document lots of responses coming from Marden and lots of responses coming from Lenham and other responses coming from wherever, Ottham, and from the town centre, where we would have a map or something where we can see where the responses come from, that would be helpful. But just simply saying, oh, these responses came from Marden and no other community being mentioned in the document, I find that a bit not clear and could scapegoat Marden. That's all I'm saying.
Councillor English.
And the reason Marden's mentioned is because Marden, a well-organised community, got a lot of responses put in, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, any more than there is with the Broadway petition with its 5,000 plus signatures. Yeah, I did say 5,000 plus. And I think that's just a matter of fact. If we did a map of all where the responses, I tell you, it would look like one of those very complicated cricket ovals you get where after the 200 runs have been scored, and there'd be so many lines on it that it really wouldn't tell us very much at all. So I am against getting officers to do work which doesn't tell us anything very much, personally. And I don't think there's anything wrong in just recording that we have had a particularly high response from a particular place. It's a fact. And it's commendable, Martin, that has happened.
Members, any further comments? So this consultation response forms now part of our evidence database. It'll be something that we will be mindful of as we move into future decision making. But for the purposes of this stage of the process, we're simply asked to note it. Is it noted, members? Thank you. Kind of nicely leads us into agenda item 17. So we're just going to have an update on where we are with the process and what our next steps might be. Mr. Edgerton again.
Thank you, Chairman. This report provides context to the next report on the agenda as well, the Local Development Scheme report. A useful summary diagram is provided in paragraph 1.4 of this report that sets out the general categories of facts influencing the work for the local plan review. The report also provides detailed updates in respect to the main categories, so I'll just pull out some of the main highlights. It's noted that a call for sites exercise has been undertaken in order to understand how the market could accommodate the significant uplift in homes required by the government. There's been a very significant number of responses, and the report notes the ongoing work of considering the site submissions, along with other evidence to identify approaches to meet the need. The report also notes that the early discussions have taken place with infrastructure providers in order to gain a greater understanding of their needs. This has included positive and pragmatic discussions with Kent County Council and their consultants to undertake transport modelling in a timely way so that the first stage results can input into the work on identifying different approaches to meet needs. Work is also ongoing with respect to sustainability appraisal and strategic environmental assessment, with baseline indicators having been produced. Going forward, these assessments will be very important in helping generate approaches to all the main matters within the local plan review. However, the focus of work is on generating evidence and undertaking the significant number of studies, and this work is ongoing. The report notes that the jump between the scoping themes and issues consultation that finished at the end of September and consulting on the submission version of the local plan review is considered too great, and there is value in undertaking a public consultation on approaches to the matters that will be contained in the local plan review, and a two-stage consultation on the approaches is proposed. Further detail is provided around the key work streams that would lead into the next public consultation. I will pick up one point of detail, and that is in respect to the detailed programme in paragraph 1.23. There is mention that the first public consultation may include gypsy and traveller growth. The evidence for this, which is an independent study, is ongoing, and there is a reliance on obtaining all necessary interviews and data by the consultants. There is therefore potential for this second element to be dealt with as part of the February 2021 proposal and that proposed consultation. Finally, this report contains a detailed response to the propositions made by the Kent Association of Local Councils. An important point for the committee is that this report is only for noting, and therefore there are no options and no preferred option required for this committee's consideration. In other words, there is no decision associated with this report. It is for noting only. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Do we have any other visiting members for this item? Good. I remembered that time, Councillor Pearl, and you weren't even on the list. Councillor English is indicating. I'm just going to draw out something a little bit here. So we've heard about the response to the calc correspondence and suggestions. That comes about because through a question I did give an undertaking that we would formally transact this matter. The report is not suggesting any direct actions to us, but now is our moment of prerogative to give an instruction if we saw it appropriate to do so. Councillor English.
I was going to simply ask, I was actually going to ask that question. I mean, the calc letter, which I only saw today, is lengthy. It is quite a meaty document, whether one agrees with it or not. It's a meaty, weighty document, which has had a lot of thought put into it, and it's got and the responses are detailed. What option do we have to give further consideration to any of the suggestions that CALC have put forward if members as a thought that the work was more merit in some of them than the official responses? I'm not saying we would, but I'm just saying I haven't had the time to think through whether we would. So what option do we have to give that further discussion, join the LDS? Because we can't do it under this.
I'll make a direct suggestion of a response to you that we've seen the responses to the responses. If after further contemplation any of us see some merit in a particular avenue, then I would suggest that as a member request, you sponsor it to the agenda for future consideration. I do not believe it would be right to leave this as a further open item for now.
I quite agree, and similarly I don't want to suggest anything tonight because, as I said, I haven't really had the time to work through it and consider options. But as long as we do actually have an option, if we wished to put it on the agenda and discuss it further, then I will go away and reflect on whether I wish that to happen or not.
And I think that some of us, probably indeed all of us, have further opportunity to discuss these matters directly with representatives of CALC. And if we can find some transactable nuggets, then I'm sure we will be keen to put them forwards. Members, I think the substantive piece of business is our next agenda item. We have an overview of where we're at. Is that noted? Thank you. So we can now move on to agenda item 18. And that's the review of the local development scheme, and it is a matter for decision. Mrs. Ironmonger? No, that's what it is Mr. Edgerton again. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is the final report in the sequence, and it's around the official timetable for the future stages of the local plan review. This is called a local development scheme. It's a formal document as part of the local development framework. It's a statutory document that sets out the key milestones for production of development plan documents, such as the local plan review itself. The current version was approved in July 2018, and since this came into effect, for reasons considered previously on this agenda, there is a need to amend the timetable to reflect the revised proposals. This includes a two-stage public consultation on the approaches to matters contained in the local plan review, information on the overall work programme proposal, and details of the requirements that will allow the first milestone to be met are contained in paragraphs 1.3 and 1.4 of the report respectively. The report recommends that the committee resolves to recommend to the Council that the Local Development Scheme 2020 to 2022 be approved and to come into effect on the 8th of April 2020. Thank you.
Councillor Pearl, you wish to speak on this, I believe?
Thank you, Chairman. And as the officer has just alluded to, in July 2018, the full council agreed its local development scheme, and had that timetable been adhered to, by now this council would have completed the sifting of the call for sites and would be coming to the end of its sort of preferred options consultation. And I think thousands of people who are caught up in the call for sites exercise will be beginning to breathe sighs of relief. But only now that this project milestone has been passed do we seem to have a proposal to change the dates and to delay the timetable for the preferred options consultation by, well, almost, it's sort of up to a year. There are obviously two reasons given in the paper for this. One is that there's been a substantial response to the scoping and themes consultation, and who would have thought people would have responded to a consultation? But this occurred 6 months ago. There's also been a substantial response to the call for sites, apparently, but that occurred between March and May last year. Neither option explains why this project has been allowed to slide for all these months before coming back to members. Both of these matters occurred sometime before the resolution of the full council on the 18th of December, which was agreed on a cross-party basis to expedite the review of all the sites in the call for sites process, quote unquote. Now that resolution was shown in draft and in good faith to the senior officers of this council. It was shared across the party groups, and at no point were the authors of the motion, or indeed councillors at large, told that what we were proposing to resolve was impossible and that it would be impossible to expedite the call for sites. Yet, like the previous local development scheme, that resolution has, well, it simply appears to have been ignored. We've had no reference to it tonight in any of the presentations. It's like it's just been erased from the record, even though it is, of course, a clear minuted resolution of the full council. And members are now, in effect, being asked to vote again. Now, I've heard this before in another context when people were considered to get a vote wrong, and it's really not great. We're in effect being asked, or rather you are in effect at this stage being asked to accept what now appears to be a fait accompli. What on earth is going on here, members? The public have been stressing over the call for sites for some months now. We've got people in yellow T-shirts here tonight, for example, who have been stood to for more than a year now. And whilst I'm sure whilst they are, in fact, very sort of polite to a fault, I imagine their nerves must be beginning to fray after a year of this. Now, if this was a proper company and the management of such a critical project, the management rather had allowed such a critical project to slide like this for months without coming back to the board and obtaining authorisation, I'm afraid heads would roll. So please, members, please do not just rubber stamp what is before you tonight. Please push back on this. Thank you.
Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was the mover of the motion to the council, and so this is the one issue that I'm very concerned about because it does appear to have been ignored, actually. And Councillor Pearl is right; he's absolutely spot on, because what we actually said was to expedite the review of all the sites submitted in the call for sites process to identify those that appear prima facie unsuitable. Now that's the point I think that Mr. Cooling raised in his question as well, and I remain really concerned and extremely disappointed, quite frankly, that this seems to be ignored, and I don't like to criticise officers because I think it's a little unfair, but it does seem to have been ignored. And our motion was a motion agreed by council almost unanimously. There were a few dissenters, but there were very few. And I remain extremely concerned that this process that we approved does not seem to be followed. Thank you.
Councillor English.
I did vote for the motion, and since then I've regretted it because it came quite clear to me reasonably quickly that actually we'd made a mistake. It is quite frustrating from the point of view of residents and councillors looking at this process, which is long, tedious, complicated. When the government before last said it was going to simplify the planning process, boy, there's an interesting definition of simplify. Making local plans easier, yeah, right. But the problem is, it rapidly became clear that a simple sifting, a culling, which to expedite in the way that was talked about, would actually produce a whole series, and it's not just the one example you referred to earlier, Mr. Chairman, it would have produced a whole series of perverse outcomes where sites that actually nominally were unacceptable were being excluded, but those are actually sites that in many ways were actually the ones that should be developed. But because for some reason there was a particular issue that a simple cull would remove them on, they couldn't be. So, and if we had gone down this path, the very unpopular and in many ways less satisfying, I'm sorry, you can shake your head all you like, but this is the fact of the matter. And
Councillor Perry, please allow the speaker to finish.
It is quite clear that if we'd gone down that path, we would have ended up in a situation where we would have ended up with a whole series of perverse outcomes. Now, having said that, we do have to flipping get on with this as quickly as we reasonably can. We all know, for one reason or another, that this process has been expensive and is massively time-consuming, and there's all sorts of silly little hoops and regulations that have been introduced that you have to go through. But we have to get on with this. And yes, we can sit here and we can spend another 20 minutes, half an hour saying what should have been done. But what we have to do is look at what we can do from here and now. So what we can't do is not adopt an LDS at all, because if we do that, we will simply end up with the government coming in and doing it for us. So the question then is, which of the two options that we do actually can follow should we adopt? If we adopt option C, it's a very, very time-consuming process, and we'll be here for a very, very long time, and we'll have a lot of very upset and angry councillors, officers, members of the public, parish councillors, MPs, you name it, and probably the government will be upset as well. So we have to move on with option A because it's the only practical option at this stage. And having got, we can argue about whether we should be on the road to Tipperary or Kilkenny, but the fact of the matter is we need to be on a road to a solution sooner rather than later, so we need to move ahead with option A.
Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Thank you. I've listened to what everyone has said this evening, and I do have sympathy with a lot of what has been said. However, I'm also in favour of the comments that Councillor English have just made, is that it's pointless going back. We are where we are, and the only thing we can do now is move forward. I was very vocal at the time that I thought the call for sites was published far too early and caused much more angst than it was actually necessary, but it's pointless going back now. We can't keep answering the same questions. We had earlier questions where we explained, or the chairman explained, why it is that we can't take out red sites at the moment. We are where we are. On that basis, moving forward, on page 101, 1.3, I'd just like some assurance, please, from officers. There is a table there which outline key stages. I've got two questions on those. The first one is, can you give us assurance as members that you will stick to this timetable going forward? And secondly, do we have the budget in place to make sure that you can deliver these?
Who would like to answer that? Mr John, Mr Richardson, Mr Coyne? Mr Coyne.
Thank you, Chair. We will, in terms of budget resources, we will monitor the progress with the plan very, very closely, stage by stage, and if there is an issue with budget, an issue with resources, we will have to deal with that as an authority. In terms of the timescale, that's the plan that we've got. We can't sit here and say that there won't be changes. For instance, one of the things that has sort of put the current timescale off kilter are changes to the national planning framework, the standard methodology. an increase of 40% in housing numbers. Now, we can't sit here and say we know that the planning system is being looked at national level at the moment. We can't say there won't be changes that could come in and impact on us. But subject to the world around us, this is the programme that we will do our best to stick to. And if there is any problem with that, we will come back to members at a very early stage and explain what and why.
I think you dodged the tip of the question there. So as you might expect, I'm not going to let you off that lightly. So I think the question is, do you have enough resources now to confidently say you will deliver this timescale?
We have the resources now that we need in terms of the work that's ongoing. We will review the resources and, give you a commitment that should we need more resources, we will make sure they're put in place. Be that bringing in extra staff or be that by sort of procuring extra support at the crunch times that we need it.
Thank you for that reassurance that we will categorically hold you to. Mr. Jarman.
Can I add to that, and this in relation to the points made by Councillors Pearl and Perry? I'll probably sound a bit defensive. As a result of the 18A consultation, and I totally agree with Councillor Pearl, yes, of course we want lots of people to respond to any consultation. So we can refine, change documents, perhaps discard parts of documents. But we are listening to councillors, and I see on an hourly basis the sort of anxiety naturally being caused as a result, in particular, of the call for sites. But for instance, as the chairman said, one of the most popular objections to development is something around the roads are congested and can't take any more traffic. So it's tempting to say, right, we'll make all these sites red in so-and-so parts of the borough, but we need a very robust evidence base because the developers, I'm afraid to say, won't take it lying down. And they'll come back on Regulation 19, they'll come back at the examination in public, as Mr. Cooling knows, who sat through the last examination in public. So we need this very strong defence. So we've accelerated the traffic modelling. We're in a much stronger position than we were with the adopted local plan. We didn't have a localised model of Maidstone Borough at the time of the actual examination, but we have accelerated that, and we will have a Maidstone model for the entire borough, which we didn't have last time around, and we'll have that over the next couple of months. So that's a big piece of work, which costs a lot of money. A lot of resources are going into it. Thank you.
I'll let Mr. Quinn come back, and then I'll take Councillor Garton hasn't spoken, then I'll come back to you, Councillor Perry.
Just to add to what Rob said, Chair, and some of the earlier discussion, I think as officers, we really do appreciate the public feeling around wanting clarity. I think the issue is, and we've got the evidence from various authorities, Uttlesford being a recent example in Essex, where if we don't keep sites in the system and demonstrate to the planning inspectorates that we have modelled all the options with those sites, then the danger is that we get before an inspector and we end up with the plan being referred back to us. At that point, we lose time, we fall below our 5-year land supply, and actually we end up in exactly the position that we don't want to end up in, is that we become sort of more vulnerable to applications coming in and being determined for us. And I think whilst, as I say, we really do sort of appreciate the feelings on that, it's really important that we don't end up with exactly the thing that we're trying to avoid here.
Councillor Garton.
I'll be happy if Councillor Perry goes first.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, yes, I totally agree with what Rob Jarman has said about the traffic modelling. I think that is incredibly important, and I accept that, and I think that's going to be one of the key issues when we come to make these decisions. But I'm going to be like a dog with an old bone on this one, because we took a lot of trouble, and I realise people have the right to change their minds subsequently. I accept all that. But the fact remains, we passed a motion at council, and it doesn't seem to have been taken into account. And that does slightly annoy me, I have to say. And I think we are duty-bound to have an explanation. And I would like to know what the process is now, because that motion has been approved. So what happens now? Thank you.
I think I'm going to come in at this point. So for my personal view, your motion was sunk when the wording was softened to say expedite rather than its original wording. I think that's...
Check the Oxford Dictionary if I...
Well, with respect, I'll finish speaking before you come back. So I think that's where the meaning of that motion lost some of its power. But I think we've got to bottom this out. So are those that are saying, get rid of the red sites now, content to lose all of the red sites, including that one that I alluded to earlier? I mean, let's get that on the table. Is that what members were asking for, are asking for? That all of the red sites, prima facie red sites, go?
Absolutely not, Chairman.
Councillor Perry, please do.
All I'm asking is that the motion that we pass be considered by officers. If officers then have a view on that, they can come back. But at the moment, the motion has not been taken into account. And that's what I find a little bit annoying. It's just been completely ignored. And I don't consider what you're saying about the use of the word expedite was wrong. I think that was the right word to use at the time. And that's what's concerning me, is the process. If we put motions to council, I expect them to be honoured or at least considered, and unless an officer can come back with their report and say, yeah, you know, we've considered this, but there are issues here. But I haven't seen any of that at all. Thank you. That's what's concerning me.
I think this becomes disingenuous when we take this back to officers to make decisions. We are the decision makers. We are responsible. I think what Councillor Pearl said earlier was interested. You know, in a different environment, you know, a year of slippage, heads might roll. I'm going to get on my soapbox that says the system of governance that we've got here is that there is no direct accountability, and I wish that there were. Decisions by committee allow this kind of slippage. Councillor English, your silence would be preferred. You know, there would be accountability that we don't have now. Hindsight's wonderful, but I think you all thought I was mad when I said, let's do our own traffic modelling, and it was probably 2 years ago. I think it'll cost us £250,000, but I think it'll be money well spent. If we'd have actually commissioned that work and had something now, we might not be looking at this slippage, but you know, we are where we are. It is a two-tier authority. We have got the best cooperation I've ever known on these matters currently. The process is accelerated. The base model for traffic modelling should be ready at the end of this month, and that should allow us to achieve this time frame that we're being asked to consider tonight. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I think, Councillor Mackay, you're probably next to speak. Councillor Garton?
Yeah, I gave over to Councillor...
Sorry, yes, you're
Perry.
quite correct,
Yeah.
and then it will be Councillor Mackay.
Anyway, so, Mr. Chairman, you were talking about accountability. Ultimately, we had a full council resolution, and that's where the accountability comes from full council. So I'm fully in support of Councillor Pearl and Councillor Perry when they want to see the red zone, sites being released. There's a lot of anxiety amongst communities all over Maidstone, and I think as much as we can do to relieve the anxiety, we should try to do that. And if that causes any problem, why don't we bring the red sites back to this committee and we sift them and we say, look, we are happy to publish them or we are not happy to publish them at an early stage. I think that would be the sensible solution on this occasion. And
Can I just ask, using what evidence?
Sorry?
What evidence would you have us use to make those judgments?
Well, at the moment, I don't even know which the red sites are. And unless we see the red sites, we can't really expect the officers to make a decision, nor can we ourselves make a decision which are the green sites. Do we actually need garden villages? Do we have so many red sites that the garden village becomes inevitable? I haven't seen the evidence yet, but we certainly should still consider an early release of the red sites, or at least an early consideration at this committee. And even if it has to be behind closed doors before we go public on that. But full council told us to, or we made a resolution to expedite things. And at the moment, we are not making any progress in expediting things to the public and taking the worries off their mind. I'm sure there will be, for a long time, worries on a lot of people's minds, but the more worry we can relieve at an early stage, the better it is. And it's also for the credibility of this council and council officers as well as members.
Expedite. Make an action or process happen sooner or be accomplished more quickly. It's a relatively term, more quickly than what? I think I said Councillor Mackay would be coming next.
I listened to this and we pass a motion at council which, broadly speaking, is ignored. We put our faith in new traffic modelling, and yet in the original local plan, traffic modelling was totally ignored by Maidstone Borough Council. They knew better than Kent County Council in large parts. I wonder whether, if the modelling we pay for suggests it is not possible, whether we're going to ignore our own advice. But having said all that, unfortunately, and with great reluctance, we have no alternative, really. We're put in a situation, quite frankly, where we've got to accept we are where we are. That is appalling, I think. So we will vote for option A with no pleasure whatsoever. And I just hope we don't have to sit here again looking at further delays.
I think you're correct in what you're saying. We are where we are. It's interesting, last time around there was traffic modelling. It wasn't shared with us, which is quite different. Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid.
Thank you. I actually find myself agreeing quite strongly with Councillor Mackay there. What I want to know is why this traffic modelling is taking so long. Why did we not put it in sooner in the process? It seems we knew what the timeline was going to be. We knew what we had to achieve. Why wasn't it put in sooner? And the other point I wanted to ask as well, you mentioned something about the delay because of a 40% uplift. We've known about this 40% uplift since I was elected, so that's at least 2 years. We've known that that was what was going to be required of us. So I just don't understand why the processes were not put in place sooner.
Because we're not the Highways Authority. And when I suggested we do our own traffic modelling, the very people sat around this table said, no, don't do that, we've got to work with them. That's what happened. That's what happened. And that's why we are where we are. But if we pick up our feet and actually really push this hard, we can get it done on the timescale that's on the papers. And I think it's regrettable, but it is where we are. Councillor Mumford.
I've heard a lot about make a decision and stick to it, which is probably the worst advice you could give to anyone. If you're going up the M14, you should be on the M1. As soon as you realise, turn around and go up the M1. We are where we are, yes. And we did make a decision to expedite it as soon as we could. But the traffic modelling is key. The evidence base is key. And there's a possibility that some of the red sites will turn green and even some of the green sites turn red. So, yeah, I have got empathy for the people that are sat around these sites and looking at their quality of life, but we are where we are, and we do need an evidence base. That evidence base will affect those decisions on the red and green, and it doesn't, we might be doing what Councillor Gartland wants us to do, sit there and pushing forward green sites and pulling out red sites, which an evidence base would change. So I am for option A tonight.
I think that's just Councillor English remaining.
What changed my mind was I follow the progress of other local plans around the country. And Uttlesford Borough Council did what our full council resolution suggested. They took out all the red sites without doing an evidence base, without analysing it. And what happened was the planning inspectorate, for the second time, because this had happened to them previously, so you would have thought they'd have learned from experience, chucked back their local plan and said, do it all again. And of course, as we all know, every year's delay with local plans, the way that these things work at the moment, means that the amount of housing that you get to build tends to go up and up. So following what happened with Uttlesford, I very reluctantly, because you know me, I'm a stickler for constitutionality and process, I very reluctantly changed my mind. And I have to say that when evidence comes along that you're wrong, and I was wrong, I do change my mind, and I don't insist on doing what I was going to do in the first place. I would secondly say that we have people here tonight who are representatives of areas that have got green sites, according to our analysis. And if we take out all of the red sites, it does mean that as a consequence, it's going to be quite hard, whatever the planning arguments, to say that those green sites that remain in and that meet the criteria will not proceed. So it limits our options considerably to take out those sites which may, but for a technicality or two, actually be sites that are deliverable and, more importantly, in some ways, acceptable. So we would be shooting ourselves in the foot. And our third thing is if we change tack now, it's actually no quicker. If we go back through all the processes, stop now, do something else, we actually are not expediting anything. We are doing something completely different, and that will take no less time. It will take probably more time. So with regret, because I got it wrong the first time. I think we need to press on as quickly as possible, and from this position, that is only to move forward with option A. But we really do need to you know, make sure that we have got all our ducks and geese and every other bird you can mention in a row, and we have funded this, and we must, as Mr. Coyne has said, be on top of this. And if there's any lag because of resources, we have got to spend the money. We've got to get people in to do this. We can't just dick around any longer.
I think I broadly agree with you, except that I think I was right to vote for expedient because it means do it as quickly as possible, more quickly. And we've already achieved that because the alternative was actually April 2022, I think, or 21, when we were going to be at the decision-making, or the first cut of decision-making, and now we're gunning for October. So, Councillor English, were you moving per the papers? Well, I'm seconding. I think we've got Councillor Clark, who hasn't spoken. I'll let you...
The one point I wanted to raise, and maybe you can take this as part of the motion, or maybe we could do it as an amendment, is my concern when it comes to traffic modelling, let's say, for instance, the junction improvements. We went through a number of iterations of JTBs, and sometimes the updates weren't on the papers, and then we'd come back a couple of sessions on, and we would have this red status, and all of a sudden we've got this risk to the programme. I'm just wondering if we can't incorporate, given that we've got a breakdown of what timetable we should be sticking to under this proposal, whether we couldn't have a verbal update from the officers and a RAG status in every SBI meeting as we follow through this process. Because that way, we as members, there won't be something that will be sort of waiting for us if this is not on the agenda for any of our meetings. And consistently, we can have a look at it and get a sense of it as participants of this committee.
I'm not sure what you're actually asking to be reported each month. Could you just be a bit clearer?
Let's say, for instance, at the moment, we believe we've got the resources in place to deliver this time frame. If there are changes to the MPPF, for instance, it may be that something comes down from government and all of a sudden we don't have the resources in place. As members, we may not see that, but officers will know about it, and it might be only when they're asked directly that they highlight a specific risk. I'm wondering whether...
No, I'm totally with you. So what you would be asking for is that a monthly update of slippage or progress on the programme that we are about to vote on. So I quite like that. Let's treat that as a separate resolution, and not cloud it with what we're being asked for, but we can issue an instruction to officers to give us that periodic update. We'll clarify the form that takes when we come to that. So the motion is moved and seconded. I'll go to the vote on those in favour. Those against? Abstentions? That motion is carried. So the next stage is this is actually recommended by this committee to full council, and full council will actually be the adopters or otherwise of this time programme that we've just debated. For the record, it is drawn to my attention that there is a typo on page 109 towards the bottom. That should say, I think, February 2021. Is that right, Mr. Edgerton?
That is correct, Chairman.
Committee, are you content with that amendment? Yes? Okay, it'll have the resolution of full council to actually make it binding, but for the record, that's noted. Councillor Clark, I think you were moving that we request officers to give us an update at each meeting on slippage or progress of the work for delivering the local plan as per the timescale agreed this evening, subject to its adoption by full council. I would second that motion. Those in favour? That's unanimous. I should have added that, well, I'll ask the committee, I think that should be a simple written update rather than just verbal. Yes? So for the sake of clarity, it can be a one-liner that says all on course, or it could be a three-liner that says we've got a bit of a blockage, we need to do something about it. But let's have it written. Members, I think that was quite an evening. It concludes our business, and I'm pleased to declare the meeting closed.